you very much. Is it left and right or up and down?
It is, yeah.
It's left and right. Lovely. Robert Louis Stevenson. Has anybody read one of his books? Treasure Island. Anything else?
Oh, kidnapped.
Kidnapped. We've got all this scenario. And the Black Arrow. Anyway, he was also a great diarist. And lived in the 1850s to 19, just into the century, I think. But he once wrote in his diary on a Sunday, he said, something remarkable has happened today. I have returned from church and I'm not utterly depressed. That is not the effect that we're looking for, is it, in church? Now, I was thinking about sermons, you know, and most sermons can be summed up in 4 words. We must try. Well, you're not doing very well here in Michael. We must try harder. Yeah. Or 2 words, really. Try. How many sermons have you heard from here that the gist of is basically try harder? Yeah? And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing, because I think we would all agree as Christians, we must try harder. And we do need to be reminded of that regularly, because we so easily slip back into being lazily pleased with ourselves, which is the default human condition, isn't it? I'm pretty good, really. I'm pretty special. So that regular reminder, we must try harder, is a good thing. But we must be careful here. Because we mustn't think that the Bible is all about we must try harder. Yes, there's plenty of that in it, but that's not necessarily the case. And certainly today, when we come to Paul's letters to the Thessalonians, we're going to look at the first chapter of his first letter. There's Thessalonica. If you're looking for your bearings, that's the east end of the Mediterranean Sea. Ephesus, Antioch, Troas, all those places are in Turkey now. And Caesarea, Lebanon maybe, and then below that Jerusalem, obviously, in Israel. Antioch, I think, in northern Syria. So that's Paul's great journey, and he arrives in Thessalonica, and he writes them a couple of letters. And you could sum up chapter 1 in 2 words, and then those words are not try harder. They're this: well done. Well done. And Paul has good reason to say, well done, to those people. And it's quite strange, isn't it? Because we're not used to coming to church and people say, well done. We're used to be like, try harder, Alistair. But I'm here today to say, well done. And it sounds a little bit jarring, but Paul had his reasons. You see, in Acts 17, we read of his visit to Thessalonica to establish a church. There was no church there, it was a missionary journey. And his visit was very much a mixed bag. As usual, he goes to the synagogue, the meeting place of the Jewish people. And indeed, some Jewish people are converted when he preaches. Now, in those days in the Roman Empire, quite a lot of non-Jewish people used to hang around the synagogue because they liked to hear about this God. They liked to hear high standards of morality and deep spirituality. And so but they hadn't become Jews, and these people were particularly receptive to the gospel. So a lot of the Greeks are converted. And he especially mentions a significant number of leading women. I'm sure all the women here today are leading women, are you not? Yeah? Important people. Wealthy people. Well, I don't know. Can't speak for the women in back. But these people were listening and were coming to Jesus. But then trouble begins. The Jews, angry at Paul and Silas, gather a mob, and there's a riot, and Paul and Silas have to flee the city by night, which is perfectly understandable. They are the focus of the anger and the violence, and so they have to get out of the way to try and diffuse the situation. But think about the people they've left behind in the church. They've just become Christians. Welcome aboard. You're Christians now. It's great. God will look after. Hang on, there's a riot. And they go around to one of these guys' house, Jason, who's been looking after Paul, so they drag him out. And so Paul, who's now many miles away, is thinking to himself, I wonder how they're doing. I wonder how they're doing. Has that persecution completely robbed out the church or damaged it so much? And so it's that concern that somebody who started the church has for how it's doing. Imagine those faithful Christians who planted the church here, thinking, how are they doing in 2025 in Canton Community Church? They'd be a bit surprised at that, maybe. Right? How are they doing? I wonder, are they still meeting? Well, there's still life in this church, is there not? Although, by the sound of it, it's quite low level. Is there life in this church?
Yes.
Yes. Amen. You're still welcoming people who come over the door for their first visit, or you've been here. I wrote thousands. Has anybody been coming 40 years? Hands up. 40 years. You've done 2,000 Sundays. Isn't that great? 2,000 Sundays. Yeah? And we need to be careful, you know, because sometimes I don't think we give ourselves enough credit, you know, for showing up. You know? For showing up. We kind of take that's the minimum. So that's that white line is showing up. Right? And we're always thinking, right, Steve's showing up. We've got to get him to do something now. We've got to make sure he's at the coffee morning. Maybe he's got to be at the lunch club. Maybe he's got to be doing outreach. Maybe his personal devotions have got to be good. And all those things are true. But we mustn't sort of downplay the fact that we are here. That we are here in the presence of God. And I say that because imagine if you drew that line not in the church, but in the people of Cardiff. Goodness me, look how well we're doing. We're right, because there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people out there who never cross. We had a guy who came to Mac a few weeks ago. He was a scaffolder from St. Mellons, right? And he had his gym bag with him, which I thought was unusual, right? And I said to him afterwards, I said, you church a lot? He said, this is the first time I've ever come to church, which was lovely. But we need to give ourselves a little, we don't need to be self-satisfied. We don't want to think, oh yeah, I've done it because I'm here in church. That's not the point. Steve made the point. You know, we need to be followers of Jesus, but it's great to be here. And we should encourage each other. Lovely to see you. Great to see you again, or maybe for the first time. Yeah? We still have to try harder, of course, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But we begin with Paul saying to the Thessalonians, you're still meeting, well done. And so Paul and Silas have been checking up. And so Paul sends Timothy to find out what's up. Because there is no WhatsApp, is there? Chris and I were talking about WhatsApp. Imagine that. The church is a couple of hundred miles away. How am I going to find out? I've got to get Steve, I've got to send him. Go over there, all one distance. It's incredible what sacrifices and efforts they made. Right. Timothy goes to find out. And it's good news. We always give thanks to God for all of you, making mention of you in our prayers. And I enjoy coming to Cardiff Community, I can't say Lighthouse Gospel, Cardiff Community Church, because there's always prayer for the saints. And I'm a church worker, and so praying for the saints is my job. And back in the good old days when I could remember things, I could pray for everybody by name, right? But there's a problem with that, is that if you're in Mac, we've got a lot of Andrews, big Andrews family. They always got prayed for. Poor old Graham and Janet Westall, at the end of the alphabet, not so much, right? So I was thinking, oh, how am I going to do that? So now I pray by where people sit. As I know, you know what it's like, you know where everybody sits. The preachers of habit, we sit in the same place every week, right? And so I can go around the church and I can pray for people. And this is what this is what Paul is doing. Paul is always praying. I mean, he says always. It doesn't mean every second of the day. It just means he regularly prays for the people in that church. And I want to encourage you to regularly pray for the physical and spiritual good of the people here in the fellowship. Now that is somewhere where we could try a little bit harder. Try harder in prayer. And I speak to myself there. Life is so busy, so many other things come into contact, but it's hard to be a Christian. And it's hard to be a Christian who's been coming here, adding up those thousands. We need prayer. We really need prayer. Constantly keeping in mind, this is his prayer, your work of faith, your labour of love, and perseverance of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ in the presence of our God and Father. And when we look at the detail of what Paul is praying about, we come across some strikingly memorable phrases, and Thessalonians is full of, the letters of the Thessalonians are full of. The work of faith, the labour of love, and the perseverance of hope. And that perseverance actually speaks not just of patience, but endurance. The ability to stick it out. Can you stick it out? Are you stickers here in Canton? Because the church needs stickers. They need people, we need people who can endure. And faith, love, and hope are three great inputs from God into our life, into our lives. Yeah? He gives us faith, he gives us love, and he gives us hope. These are the inputs, right? What are the outputs? Right? These are the things that are coming into our life. Well, what effect do they have? How can we see the effect of those things? Well, work of faith, labour of love, patience, or endurance of hope. Let's start with the work of faith. Now, normally, Christians try to keep faith and works as far apart as possible. Why is that? What are we worried about? We're worried about the gospel, right? Because the gospel says not by works, doesn't it? By grace, by faith is our salvation. So we try to keep them apart in case anybody gets the idea that we work for our salvation, that we do good things and therefore we are saved. And what are we saved from? Well, we're saved from the reign, we're saved from the kingdom, as it were, of sin and death. But also we're saved from the wrath of God. Why is God angry with us? Why is he angry with us? We're perfectly decent people, are we not? Everybody murderers here, are we? Bank robbers? But we are sinful people by nature. And that is reflected in our selfishness and our distance from God. Before we are saved, that distance is infinite. And we don't like to hear about a God of wrath nowadays, do we? I used to produce religious programs for the radio. And I used to laugh because whenever the guys come in with a script, I'd say, is this the love of God? Is it? Oh yes. I said, excellent, get it on. I never had anybody come with a script about the wrath of God. Listeners to the radio don't want to hear that today. In the middle of Ken Bruce, when Ken Bruce used to work for Radio 2. Right? But it's true. God is a God of wrath because he's a God of holiness. And the wrath is an expression of his holiness. And we need to understand not just God's love, but God's judgment. And he saves us not because of what we do, not because of works, but because of his great love for us. And the love of Jesus. How does he bring us? How does he save us? By the blood of Jesus, by the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus. So we don't want to confuse the issue of faith, of trusting God, and works, right? But nonetheless, once we are saved, then our lives should be characterized by works. Yeah? And our faith has to express itself. In works. I'll show you an example. This is Abram. Abram, before he was Abraham, before he got an extra letter. Yeah? And the Lord said to Abram, and this is what I really like about this is, there's no context, right? Abram's just walking around one day, and one day the Lord speaks to him, And the Bible doesn't give you any backstory. God speaks out of darkness. Now, the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house, 3 things, to the land which I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and I'll bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Now, I want you to imagine, right, you live next door to Abraham, 4,000 years ago, right, in northern Syria or whatever it was, right? And one day Abraham says, do you know what? God has spoken to me. What? Yeah. God. Not just a God, not one of the pagan gods that littered the place. No, no, no. The eternal God, maker of heaven and earth, has spoken to me. Well, what does he say, Abraham? He said, go out of Haran from your town, from your country, from your people. And then he said, I'm going to make you, I'm going to give you a land, and you're going to go to that promised land. And I'm going to make you a great nation, and I'll bless you. You will be blessed, and you'll be a blessing to other people. Wow. 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 Go. Go. And I really do love the fact that not only will Abraham be blessed, but, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. How is that possible? Because of Jesus. Everybody will be blessed. What a message. If somebody said to you, you would sit up and take notice, wouldn't you? You would think, wow, Abraham. And then maybe a week later you bump into him in the market. Oh, okay, fair enough. Maybe he hasn't gathered his stuff yet to go. And then a month later he's still here. And you go and say, did you, Abraham, what are you doing still here? What do you mean? Well, of course I'm still here. But you said God told you to go. Oh, yes. And he was going to bless you. Oh, yes. Well, did you believe it? Oh, yes. I believe it. Just not now. But I'm busy and I'm just married and I'm settling down and maybe later I'll go. Is he a believer? Is Abraham a believer if he says, I believe, and he's still in Haran?
No.
He's not a believer, is he? James says, show me your faith. Show me my works. Because without works, faith is dead. In other words, it's not real faith. It's not real faith. You know? Abram. I think that's 1,000 miles from Haran down to Shechem. What a journey. To a place he'd never seen. To people he didn't know. Based on the promise of God, and he had faith, and he is the Father of our faithfulness. Romans 4, I want to say. Read that. And when he gets there, he finds the promised land. Oh, not that he's free of difficulties or anything like that. That's the works of faith. I should show you my faith by my works. And you should show me your faith by your works. That's one. Labor of love. It might seem at first sight that labor of love and works of faith are the same thing. Well, what's the difference? Well, the word for work is the key thing. Because the first works of faith, that's about energy, doing things, right? That's great, that's what we want. We want energy and doing things in our faith. This word, the Greek word for labour, comes from the word to be beaten up, right? You've worked so hard, it's like somebody's given you a beating. Like soldiers on a long march, right? Marching 20, 30 miles a day, carrying their packs. Like guys, have you ever tried digging a ditch? I mean, seriously digging a ditch, right? We don't do that anymore, do we? We get a little digger to do that. I tell you what, 20 minutes on a shovel. I bet there's not one man here who could do more. And really going. It's jolly hard work. That's how hard the work is that he's talking about. The labour of love. And so Paul is recognising the effort that the Thessalonians are putting into their faith. The hard yards of their service for Jesus. Now, if I wanted to preach a try-harder sermon, this would be the place. This is solid gold for try harder. Is our work for the church so hard? Is our work for Jesus, not like the church, so hard that people say, do you know, Alistair really beats himself up for his faith? Sadly, I don't think anybody's ever said that about me. But I'd love to hear them say it about you. They work so hard. It's not just that they come here on a Sunday, that's great, we know that, we've talked about that, that's great. But when they go out the door, they take with them an energy that is demanding everything from them. Honour those who work and serve among you, Paul says in chapter 5 of this letter. He says, honour those who have leadership over you. And as a leader, you might think, Alistair, you probably preach on that every Sunday. I never preach on it. But it's in the text. And so I preached on it last Sunday, and I said to the church, honour those who have leadership. And I was quite emphatic, like that. Honour those who are in leadership. That's what you have to do. We have to do. What do they have to do? Work hard. Leaders. Beat yourselves up in the service of God's body which meets here together. And in a context where you are honoured and respected. I know that's not cool today. I know leadership and authority in every hand is dragged down, but not in the church. Not in the church when we do it right. Romans 16, it's an interesting passage. It's where he does all his thank yous and hellos. Hello, thank you. To the church in Rome, because Paul hasn't been to Rome. And he's got some great Persis the beloved. She's worked hard in the Lord, first sense of the word, energy. She's working hard for the Lord. And I was thinking that, imagine if you were Persis and you're reading this letter, and they read it out in the church, because they don't have copies of it, they read it out in the church, and right at the end, well done, Colin. You're sat there. Oh, little did Persis know that 2,000 years later, we know her name, and we know how hard she worked. Fantastic. She is surely rejoicing in that commendation in heaven today. Yeah? Deservedly so. And not just her. Verse 6, Mary, who has worked so hard for you, Mary. That's apparently 50% of the Jewish women at the time of Jesus were called Mary. It's a bit like living in Wales, right? We've got the same name. Mary has taken a beating for the people in the church. That's the beating up one. How hard has she worked to serve her fellow believers? Nobody can doubt their faith. Their faith is evident to everybody by their works. And so, to hope. The perseverance of hope. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure, patience I understand, but perseverance, because this is going to be tough, and it makes perfect sense. Paul and Silas and Timothy have left. They've left this new church, and the Jews hate them, and are stirring up unrest, violent unrest. And so the new Christians, had no luxury of escape. They had to face the music. What sustained them? Hope. And what was their hope? A glorious future. The promise of life with God, where there are no tears and no more suffering. We had Remembrance Sunday. And it's always difficult, isn't it? My son was a soldier. My father was in the Air Force at the Second World War. My grandfather fought in Flanders, was invalided out at Passchendaele in 1917. And I'm sure all of your family have connections. We're a warlike nation. We've been to war everywhere, right? But there's a future without that. The remembrance that we will have is the remembrance of Jesus and not the remembrance of war and battle. And I was thinking of that. Persis and Mary and many, many, many more, millions more, are enjoying their reward right now. Alongside many Christians, and I'm sure you could name them, who served in this church and have now entered into their reward. There's so much to hope for. Knowing, brothers and sisters, beloved by God, His choice of you. If you're a Christian today, you've been chosen by God. You've been chosen. You might not feel like it. Maybe you didn't feel like it for those Thessalonians. Maybe sometimes you thought, I wish I just stayed in the synagogue when it was safer. Maybe they had doubts, but they've been chosen. Not just chosen, they've been beloved by God. What a verse. What a verse. We know that we are loved and chosen by God if we come here as believers. And if we look around at what our culture has to offer in comparison with what the Christian faith has to offer, it is ashes and dust. Modern cultural life is a desert by current. There is no faith. Empty of love, obsessed with sex, empty of dignity, and utterly without hope, for there is no meaning and no purpose in the message of our day. We are loved and we are chosen. What a mighty God we have. Let us close singing his praises as we look forward to the incarnation of Jesus at Christmas. Light of the world, you came down out of darkness. Well, let's just play.
Yeah, click it once more. Yeah.
We'll stand to sing. Thank you.